As the NBA goes into its 76th season this year, we've seen many great moments and dynasties come and go. We even either seen the continuation or the end of a dynasty as the Golden State Warriors win their 4th ring in 8 years after being doubted due to injuries and a short-lived rebuild of the team. But with that hype that last year brought, with the Suns having their best season in franchise history, Luka Doncic taking down that said Suns team, Jokic earning his 2nd MVP trophy among many others, let's do what will possibly be the longest video I've ever made, creating a tier list and ranking of the last 10 NBA seasons of its entirety. As usual, there are qualifications towards my ranking system, but unlike the others, there really isn't much of a system to work with. But as usual, tell me how you would change my rankings in the comment section below, and let's reminisce about the seasons in the past and what made them good, bad, or even in some cases mid. But as you would know, this might be a long one, so you already know who it is. Roll it! First, let's start off this ranking with the 2012 NBA season. The season where the NBA came back from a lockout the previous year, and where LeBron James looking to repeat as champions as he won his first championship in a Miami Heat jersey. But speaking of LeBron James, this is also the year that people would consider to be one of his best seasons he has ever had as a pro athlete, coming through and averaging career best from the field and shooting over 40% as a three-point shooter, en route to his 2nd MVP award and his 2nd back-to-back MVP. But around the league, people were starting to try to come after the big three Heat in an attempt to take down this artificial dynasty. In the East to contend, you had Carmelo Anthony leading the Knicks, who was able to lead the NBA in points per game, and that also owned Defensive Player of the Year last year, Tyson Chandler. And of course, the come-up story of Paul George and Indiana Pacers that owned the best defense in the NBA. Out west, you had the Thunder still on top of the standings even after losing James Harden in free agency to the Rockets, who's becoming a star as soon as he touched down in Houston. The Lob City Clippers, who are at their peak after owning their best record in franchise history, and the same for the Denver Nuggets. Then of course, you had the usual San Antonio Spurs dominance as they always had. In the regular season, there was a lot of storylines that formed out of all areas, the most known being the 27-game win streak the Miami Heat had, rivaling the 71-72 Los Angeles Lakers. The Boston Celtics, who used to terrorize the NBA, are now becoming a lot more human, getting a record of 41-40, and unfortunately, the body of Kobe Bryant decided to turn on him as he tore his Achilles on literally the 2nd to last game of that season. But the real thing that carried the NBA season was the playoffs, because it was full of rivalries, beefs, and moments that'll be sealed in NBA history forever. You had the dogfight between the Clippers and Grizzlies, an upset with Stephen Curry and the Warriors taking down one of the best teams in the NBA in the Nuggets, the Grizzlies shocking the Thunder, beating them in 6 games in the 2nd round. But one of the most anticipated matchups was actually in the East, was truly set to happen, that everyone was waiting for: the Miami Heat versus the Indiana Pacers. Now, of course, you had to be there to remember just how both of these teams matched up so well against each other that created this hype to see if Paul George would finally be able to trample over LeBron James. On one side, you had the Miami Heat, who had the best offense in the league, being led by LeBron James, who up until that point was completely mopping the floor with his opponents in the playoffs by beating them on an average of 16 points a game without even sweating. On the other side, you had the Pacers, who had the best defensive team in the NBA, who had to go through slugfest after slugfest, beating a scrappy Hawks team in 6 and battling Carmelo Anthony, who wasn't going down without a fight, averaging nearly 30 points a game that series. But while the Grizzlies were getting swept by the Spurs, the real conference finals was finally starting between the Heat and the Pacers. But in that series, just once again solidified why LeBron James is truly the unstoppable force of the NBA. In that series, he averaged 29 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, and a steal and a block a game, while putting up over 50% from the field and once again 40% from 3. The coaching in that series was truly a battle of wits, as the main game plan for Frank Vogel's offense was to attack the smaller and less physically dominant Heat team with Roy Hibbert, who went from averaging 11 points in the regular season to 22 points a game in the series, taking over the paint. It got so bad that even 4 people on the Heat's team had to chip in on defensive effort in the paint, with LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Chris Anderson, and Chris Bosh all averaging over a block a game. You know it's bad when the player that's giving you fits is Roy Hibbert, but in the end, the two teams were trading wins after wins, and the Heat came out victorious in Game 7 off of LeBron James and Dwayne Wade's combined 53 points, and especially from the free throw line, as the team combined for 33 of 38 from the free throw line, scoring 33% of their total points from the line, which I'm sure didn't sit well with Pacers fans. But in the finals, you have the Spurs and the Heat in their first out of their 2 face-offs we'll see today, especially considering this was the same team that kept LeBron James away from winning his first ring in 2007. And as you remember, this whole series was a battle of wits from both ends. On the Heat side, they had to deal with the weaknesses in the post they had, allowing Tim Duncan to average a double-double, and even had to deal with an out-of-his-mind Danny Green, who was playing like the ultimate Spurs role player. In that series, he shot 55% from 3, 3, almost breaking the three-point record in the finals, and blocked the most shots out of everybody in the team, and even scored 27 points in a Game 3, which was the game high. But for the Spurs, they also had to deal with LeBron James himself, who was averaging a near triple-double, and Dwayne Wade. But again, this series can be wrapped up in one clip, and that clip is when LeBron James missed a 3 with Ray Allen to go on and send Game 6 in overtime to keep the Heat alive, and eventually winning this series in 7 off of LeBron James 37 to add a finals MVP to his already stacked resume. Overall, this season had a lot going forward when it came to implications and continuing of a dynasty, but outside of a great finals and compared to some of the seasons we'll see later, this season turned out to be kind of average, but the playoffs for sure saved it, so I'll give it a B. And it's only a B when you end up considering all the other great years we'll end up seeing later and some that just obviously don't live up to par. Next, we have the 2013 NBA season, which of course was highlighted as the redemption arc of the San Antonio Spurs beating the Heat in a convincing fashion in the finals. But of course, we have to talk about the regular season first and foremost. In this season in particular, it's where we really started to see some real interesting changes from the infrastructure of the league. For one, we see just how lopsided the conferences were, as the West owned 7 of the 9 total teams with 50-win seasons, as the East starts to rot little by little in the coming years. Speaking of rotting, this has to be the type of brain the GM of the Nets had, making the trade on July the 12th, 2013, sending 4 future first-round picks to the Celtics for aging veterans in Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Jason Terry to form the jankiest super team I've ever seen with Joe Johnson and a newly acquired Deron Williams from last year. Obviously, when the trade was made, they did it to combat the super team Heatles, but considering the future ramifications of it, it was not worth it at all. Around the league, we had Kevin Durant adding on to another scoring title with a 32-point-per-game season and getting his first and only MVP. Michael Carter-Williams surprising everyone with his rookie campaign to then drop off later. Dwight Howard joining the Houston Rockets after a failed Lakers experiment to form an unstoppable pick-and-roll duo with James Harden. Anthony Bennett somehow being the #1 overall pick of the 2013 NBA draft. Goran Dragic developing into one of the best point guards in the league, winning Most Improved Player. And of course, the end of an era to the Danny Green saga in Indiana. Doc Rivers joining the Los Angeles Clippers to give them a boost in the winning column. Carmelo Anthony and LeBron James dropping career highs on the Bobcats. The Hornets rebranding to the Pelicans. And most funny of all, the 26-game losing streak from the 76ers that almost broke the record for the longest losing streak ever. Outside of that relatively normal season achievements-wise, you still had the playoffs, which still wasn't much to write home about on the side of the East. But again, back out West, it was a dogfight after another dogfight after another. Because in all but 2 series out West going into Game 6s, no one escaped easily. You have Damian Lillard ended the Houston Rockets playoff host with a game winner to end the series in Game 7. The Clippers, Warriors, Grizzlies, Thunder, and Spurs Mavericks game going to 7 games in very dramatic fashion. And then you still had one of the better conference finals games in this video with Thunder and Spurs and Heat versus Pacers. With a rematch of the 2012 Eastern Conference Finals, the top 2 teams in the West going against each other again for the potential to get their revenge against LeBron James. Well, it was revitalized once again as the Spurs barely escaped beating an out-of-his-mind Russell Westbrook, and the Heat winning 3 out of the 4 games to start off the series as they made easy work of the Pacers this time around. But in the finals, the feel of it was not the same as last year, because with a whole summer to make sense of how they lost, the Spurs came back stronger than ever as a team, as a top 5 offense and top 5 defense, and owning the largest collective of scorers in the NBA, with 6 people scoring over 10 points a game, while the Heat were dealing with their own issues internally, with Dwayne Wade coming out of his prime and not being able to help LeBron James in the finals as he should, putting up 15 points a game with below average efficiency, needing to win, unlike last year where he did step up. Due to that, the Spurs made easy work of the Heat, beating them by an average of 18 points a game. While the Heat got slightly worse, the Spurs got a lot better and was able to turn around their mistakes from last year to win another ring for the Popovich era with Tim, Tony, and Manu. But this season overall was the same as last year when it came down to things, especially when you ended with an ass whooping to the winners of last year. Climactic for some, anticlimactic to others. To me, I'm in the middle, so I gotta give this one a C compared to what we'll end up seeing later. Now this is where we start getting into some real interesting storylines. With the 2014-15 NBA season, you had a lot of interesting things happen throughout the entire season and the entire league. But let's start before that. The main story of the summer was LeBron James leaving Miami only after 4 seasons and 2 championships after promising like 10 of them to go to the Cleveland Cavaliers in an attempt to win them a championship, while Paul Gasol leaves the Lakers to help the Chicago Bulls become stronger. And of course, you have Carmelo Anthony deciding to stay in New York. But in the regular season, you had a lot of emerging storylines coming to fruition. For one, in the East, you had one of the weirdest first seeds I have ever seen, with the Atlanta Hawks with a record of 60-22, which to this day is still their best record in franchise history. And this wasn't done off of one player. It was done from a collective of players, with 6 players scoring 10 points or more per game. Doesn't that sound familiar? While also being one of the best defensive teams in the league. Due to this, they were able to sneak in 4 of their 5 starting lineup members into the All-Star game, becoming the first collective of players to win NBA Players of the Month, and at their best, winning 17 games straight in the month of January. But even with that success in the world, you still had to see how LeBron James was doing as he went back to Cleveland to form a new big 3 with himself, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Love, who was traded for the first overall pick of that draft, Andrew Wiggins. They even further improved on that team by adding Iman Shumpert and J.R. Smith via trade with the Knicks. But it was a gel year for LeBron, not being able to be as dominant numbers-wise, and even firing his coach and Mike Brown for David Blatt. But they still managed to be the second seed in a comfortable fashion in the Eastern Conference. Outside of that, in the East, it was still rather quiet. Derrick Rose came back from a season-ending meniscus injury, Goran Dragic got traded to the Heat, and the Celtics traded away Rajon Rondo to finally end the era with the Big Four in the Celtics. But once again, the West looked to be the more interesting conference, with 7 teams winning 50 or more games, and of course the final spot in the 8th seed going to the Pelicans for the first time with Anthony Davis off of a game-winning shot from him in the final game of the season. But in the West, you had the emergence of Stephen Curry and the Golden State Warriors, with him showing off his dominance as a scorer, averaging a near 50-40-90 and leading his team to a very dominant first seed en route to winning his first MVP. Outside of that, you still have the Rockets and Clippers fighting for the 2nd seed, Portland being the 4th seed due to interesting circumstances that I won't get into, the Spurs, Grizzlies, and Mavericks, and again being in top form. You had Kobe Bryant pass over Michael Jordan in the all-time scoring marks, and also passing John Havlicek for the most missed shots missed in a career, and Dirk Nowitzki being the highest scoring non-American in NBA history. But there is also one more tiny storyline that happened that season, and that's the injury to Kevin Durant, who just last year won MVP, which made things the Russell Westbrook show in Oklahoma City that made him the league's leading scorer at 20 points a game. But going into the playoffs, you still had the same deal. Nothing worth talking about in the East outside of the injury to Kevin Love against the Celtics and LeBron's swift handling of the Hawks in the conference finals, while the West was surprisingly very similar. The main storyline being the game-winning shot from Chris Paul over the Dynasty Spurs, and the Clippers then blowing a 3-1 lead to the James Harden-led Rockets, while the Warriors were on cruise control the entire way, only losing 3 games up until the finals. But in the finals, we saw the might once again of LeBron James leading the series 2-1, scoring 40 points in 2 of those games. But due to an injury to Kyrie Irving in that series and the death lineup in Golden State being thrown out, the Cavaliers lost 3 straight games to give Stephen Curry his first championship, but not his first finals MVP. That went to Andre Iguodala. The season was pretty interesting when it came to storylines and events in the regular season, but the playoffs in a vacuum fails to be overly entertaining like the ones we will see, and even some in the past. We did see a takedown of a championship-worthy team for that same team to crumble against the Rockets, but outside of that, we had the finals be the most entertaining thing, and even then, that wasn't played up to its best level due to absences of Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love. For that, I think a C is fair for now, but if the playoffs were to live up to expectations, it would definitely at least be a B. Now we go into one of the best seasons of our modern time, according to most, and it's for good reason. But we don't make rankings around here without making a case for it first. The 2015-16 season is full of all-time great moments, accolades, and headlines. The first major one being Kobe Bryant's final NBA season, as he would go about playing one more season to complete his 20th. Of course, due to that, despite the terrible team he played on, it became national news whenever he exceeded expectations with his crippled body still, especially in the final game of the season, where he would send us away with a 60-point game against the Jazz. However inefficient, no one cares. It's Kobe being Bryant. But let's talk about the story that of course trumped the Kobe story, and that is the level up of Wardell Stephen Curry taking over the NBA all season as he led the Warriors to the best NBA record in NBA history at 73-9, eclipsing the Jordan Bulls of 1995. And this was off of the back of Stephen Curry averaging a 30-point 50-40-90 in the dynamic team play of the Warriors all around. And we all know how he broke records like being the fastest player to score 300 threes in the season, passing Kyle Korver's record of consecutive threes made in a game, breaking the streak record of games won at home, and of course being the first player to ever hit 400 threes in a season, en route to becoming the first unanimous MVP in NBA history. But even impressively enough, he still had the Spurs at a distance, but still mightily impressive 67-15 with the free agent acquisition in LaMarcus Aldridge, who aided at his prime in pre-injury injury, Kawhi Leonard, who torched the league defensively en route to winning a DPOY title. Outside of that, with the rest of the league, you still had pretty pedestrian stuff compared to the two juggernauts in the West. Around the NBA, you still had LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers in the East, the Raptors on their come up being the second seed in the East. Then of course you still had to add in the retirements of Tim Duncan and Kevin Garnett, the reunion of KD and Russell Westbrook as they took the third seed, Zach LaVine in his beautiful dunk contest versus Aaron Gordon, and all the records and accolades broken across the league from people like Draymond Green, LeBron James toppling multiple people in the all-time scoring list, Klay Thompson hitting 11 threes in a game, breaking a record, among much more. But the real fun starts in the playoffs, because this is some of the most interesting storylines that come from this entire season outside of everything else. On both of the East and West first and second round series, you didn't really have much to talk about, interestingly, outside of Toronto being tested in 2 straight playoff series with 2 straight Game 7s, and the Thunder and San Antonio series in the second round. But outside of the finals, you had one of the best series you will ever see in this video with the Golden State Warriors and the OKC Thunder. Between these two teams, you already had an all-time great game go down as the Thunder lost in overtime to the Warriors off of a last-second 3 from Stephen Curry that shocked the NBA world and further shown the shooting dominance of Stephen Curry. But this time around, you had to deal with KD and Russ in a series rather than in just one overtime game, and they was able to utilize that to their advantage, overwhelming the Warriors in games 3 and 4 by beating them by scores of 28 and 14 points. But unfortunately, they was against the coaching genius that is Steve Kerr and the meltdown of Russell Westbrook, who in the last 3 games, despite averaging 27, 7, and 10, shot under 40% from the field and under 30% from 3, and averaging 5 turnovers a game, even having a 7 turnover game in Game 5. And for Kevin Durant, it was the exact same. He also flamed out, going from averaging 28 points a game on solid splits that won them games, then decreasing his scoring numbers and having a worse time efficiency-wise while turning up his volume. Adding Game 6 Klay scoring 41 in that game, and Stephen Curry having one of his best performances shooting-wise in a slugfest in a true Game 7 fashion. The Warriors came out the winner, but this time we also ended up getting the rematch we all wanted, with the Warriors at their peak and the Cavaliers fully healthy and ready for round 2 from last year. And as we all know, the series did not disappoint. LeBron James turned superhuman, leading his entire team in every major statistical category, and in the final 3 games on his road to completing the first 3-1 series comeback in finals history, he had averages of 36 points, 11 rebounds, nearly 10 assists, with 3 blocks and 3 steals a game, while almost even getting a 50-40-90 if it wasn't for the free throws. Then you had the heroic efforts of Kyrie Irving, who helped out LeBron in that comeback, scoring 41 with LeBron in Game 5 to start the comeback, and ending the finals with a game-winning bucket that sealed the fate of the best team in NBA history. And also, how you can forget about the play that led up to that, the beautiful and iconic chase down block from LeBron James on Andre Iguodala that everyone remembers that finals for, to bring Cleveland its first ever championship and probably LeBron's most meaningful championship. But the final series didn't go down without its own set of controversies, as everyone does. The main ones being the Draymond Green suspension in Game 5 and the petty fouls Warriors fans believe that Stephen Curry was subjected to in Game 6. Everybody has their own opinions on that, but for me, the Draymond one was entirely on him, and for Steph, I have no opinion on that at all. All I know is this wrapped up what was possibly the best season we have ever had in a long time, and not much can compete with that. Due to that, I'll give it the S tier, the highest tier possible, and there should be no dispute about that. Now, after that amazing NBA season, how does the basketball gods decide to bless us the next year for the 2016-17 season? Well, unfortunately, we start things off with a disturbance in the force as one of the best players in the NBA, Kevin Durant, decides to sign with the Golden State Warriors, who just broke the all-time wins record to make the strong even stronger. And as you can imagine, between NBA fans, this created a rift in opinion on whether he was justified to do so, and believe me, I will try my damnedest to rank this without bias, because I hated this move as much as anyone, and everybody was correct to say that this was going to eventually ruin the parity in the NBA for a few years. But this is also the season where a lot of teams start making the dumbest signings known to man during free agency due to the cap increase. I'm not going to go over some of these bad moves, but if you were there, you know exactly how bad this was. But going into the season, the main storyline was how good was this Warriors team going to be and who was even daring to try to beat them. And considering it took a 3-1 series comeback and LeBron to turn into basketball Jesus himself to even beat this team, there weren't many options or much hope out there. And that led to the Warriors having the best record for the third year in a row with a record of 67-15, with Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, and Kevin Durant all averaging over 20 points per game as they steamroll through teams on a day-to-day basis. But we still have some interesting storylines that made this season absolutely historic. Like for Russell Westbrook, who became the first player since Oscar Robertson in the 1961-62 season to average a triple-double while dragging a very horrible offensive team in the OKC Thunder to the 6th seed, which gave him MVP honors that year. And it created a major debate whether he deserved it over James Harden, who had a very similar season stats-wise while being on the better team who had the 3rd seed. Other things around the league include Devin Booker scoring 70 points in the game, which put him 11th all-time in a single-game performance. Giannis Antetokounmpo slowly turning into one of the best players in the NBA, winning Most Improved Player, while leading his whole team in every major statistical category on the Bucks. Draymond recording a triple-double without any points and winning DPOY that year. And one of the most wholesome stories in the NBA being 5'10" Isaiah Thomas leading the Celtics to the 1st seed over LeBron and the Cavs, becoming an All-Star, an All-NBA member, and of course, King of the 4th quarter, no Kenny. So with that being said, we're going to the playoffs with the main question being, will anyone knock out the Warriors? And that answer ended up being a resounding no, as they went and swept the West in smooth fashion, while East you had the Cavaliers do the exact same thing. So we end up with the Cavaliers and Golden State Warriors Part 3. This time, instead of an even playing field like they had in 2016, the Golden State Warriors have KD. And outside of a 137-point explosion from the Cavaliers in Game 4, while down 3-0 that included a 49-point first quarter, the Cavaliers were utterly useless to the might of the Warriors, which adds to the championship total of the Warriors. Now, this season had a lot going for it when it came to storylines, especially with KD coming in and shocking the NBA world, going to Golden State, and their dominance was pretty fun as they played an addicting style of basketball. And again, every Warriors game was basically an all-star game. Then you had the beef between Russ and James Harden stuffing the stat sheets, IT scoring like a maniac, the Giannis come up. This was certainly one of the more fun regular seasons, but the playoffs kind of ruined it in some way, with 8 of the 15 series ending in 5 games or less, and of course the anticlimactic and unfortunately predictable winners putting a sour taste in some people's mouths. So when it comes to the rankings, compared to others, I'll give it a B for the fun regular season but anticlimactic playoff series. If there is one thing to describe the 2017-18 season, I would call it the season of keeping up with the Joneses, because as the 2016-17 season concludes, the talks around the league about beating the Golden State Warriors are still active and even more louder than usual, because teams all over made it their duty to go after them by making trades and moves to keep up with them. The most major one being the Houston Rockets on July 28th, where they traded a plethora of role players and a 2018 first-round pick for Chris Paul to match up with James Harden to create one of the scarier duos in the backcourt in the NBA. This move was thought by the media not to be enough to scare the Warriors, but as we'll see later, there was a reason to fear this duo. And then of course you have to consider the other major moves around the league, which includes Jimmy Butler going from the Bulls to the Timberwolves, Blake Griffin becoming a Piston via trade, Paul George being traded to OKC to create a duo Russell Westbrook, and then Carmelo Anthony joining later to make it a trio, Kyrie Irving being traded to the Celtics due to their fallout with him and LeBron James, which caused a trade marathon for LeBron later that season, where he traded over half his team after a rocky start that season. All of these moves created a lot of dialogue within the NBA world, and that main dialogue was always, was this enough to beat the Golden State Warriors? And in some cases, you could see some of the changes start to happen. The Houston Rockets with the James Harden and Chris Paul duo was now able to torch the NBA with a record of 65-17 for the best record in the NBA, with the MVP being James Harden, who averaged a career high at the time, 30 points a game, while his team overall owned the best offense in the league and had a top 5 defense at the same time. And all it took was one major trade, bringing in Chris Paul to help James Harden open up the floor and share ball handling duties so people don't just try to focus in on James Harden. Despite the Warriors still owning the second best record in the West, still going strong with only a few hiccups along the way, the Trailblazers being at their peak, the DeMarcus Cousins AD duo leading them to the 6th seed, and the OKC Thunder leveling up despite people expecting them to do a lot better, and another Russell Westbrook triple-double season. Out in the East, you had Toronto and Boston being the kings of the East, while LeBron James' team in Cleveland was really struggling to get anything going, owning one of the worst defenses in the league. The Ben Simmons-Joel Embiid duos finally got started after Ben Simmons' injury took him out for an entire year. Then Victor Oladipo becoming one of the most exciting players in the NBA, while getting Most Improved Player as soon as he was traded away from the OKC Thunder. But once again, with a great NBA regular season, we move on into that year's playoffs that was full of drama, narratives, and upsets in both conferences. Starting off in the East, you had LeBron James once again tap into that God mode he was always known for going into in the playoffs, going through 2 Game 7 situations, multiple game winners, and absolutely disrespecting the whole country of Canada, sweeping the first seed en route to another NBA Finals appearance while averaging 34 points a game, while second best option in Kevin Love had one of his worst shooting performances in his playoff career. The absolute carry job LeBron James had to do to make it back to another NBA Finals will be remembered forever, with 7 40-point games just in conference play alone. Out west, you had a lot more controversy going on, starting off with the 2 upsets, with the Thunder's big 3 losing to a rookie Donovan Mitchell and the 3rd seed Blazers being swept and absolutely being destroyed by Anthony Davis and Rajon Rondo. Both teams losing ended up being subjugated to ridicule, as they should, but both of the winning teams in those situations got clapped in the second round by the Warriors and Rockets. With that, we had one of the most anticipated conference finals matchup that everybody wanted to see in the Rockets and the Warriors, which to some, depending on the outcome, was the actual NBA Finals. And this series was everything we wanted and more, as this series went to a very competitive 7 games. But while the Rockets had the Warriors, one of the best created teams ever, made up 3-2, Chris Paul's body decided to turn on him, sustaining a hamstring injury that kept him out for the rest of the playoffs in Game 5. And with the combination of Game 6 Klay going off for 35 points in a blowout and a cataclysmic collapse in Game 7 that included a 11-point lead being blown with 27 missed threes en route to losing to the Warriors by 9 points to blow their chance to knock out the clear favorites in the Warriors. And those said favorites went on to smack the Cavaliers in 4 games, where the only competitive one was due to a mistake in the 4th quarter from J.R. Smith that turned the game into an overtime situation and to lose to the Warriors dynasty once again. Now, this season absolutely had it all. Big time trades, upsets in the playoffs, historical performances, the whole 9 yards. But how does it rank up in a vacuum? Was it as good as the Stephen Curry show in 2015? I'd have to say not fully, but it was still a great season nonetheless, outside of the obvious finals outcome. And A would be a perfect place for this, as it was still one of the better seasons we've ever had, but it doesn't fully match up with 2015 all the way. Still a respectable place for it nonetheless. Now we go into the aftermath of another championship year from the Golden State Warriors. This year made harder due to the Houston Rockets. But just like the last time the Golden State Warriors was contested and was brought to the brink of elimination, a new source of superpower was brought to the team, as one of the major headlines of the season was DeMarcus Cousins signing with the Warriors on a 1-year, $5 million deal out of frustration of not getting any major deals after his injury. Now, as you can imagine, this caused major outrage from the NBA world, as the Warriors had an entire starting lineup of former All-Stars, creating the first of its kind. So people were of course expecting a repeat of last year and the year before to complete the first three-peat since the Lakers in the early 2000s. And just like what we had last year, how did the rest of the NBA go about trying to combat this? Well, teams out west didn't make any major moves this time around outside of LeBron James leaving Cleveland to become a Los Angeles Laker, but teams out east were starting to level up in their own right. First, the Toronto Raptors, after getting tired of losing to LeBron over and over and over again, decided to make a huge trade with a lot of risk involved, trading away DeMar DeRozan to obtain all-NBA talent Kawhi Leonard, who was getting tired of San Antonio after how they handled his injury he sustained to the Warriors in the playoffs the year before. The reason it was considered risky is due to Kawhi's unwillingness to stay in Toronto since he was on the last year of his contract, but they had to make the most out of this opportunity, which we'll learn later they absolutely did. But while that happened, the 76ers also decided to level up, adding the leadership of Jimmy Butler to help out Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, who lost in embarrassing fashion to the Celtics the previous year. Around the league though, you still had the same trends happening. However, the Warriors still showed more signs of weakness despite their team's perceived dominance, going 57-25 to lead the West. However, the NBA this year had a lot of come-up stories from non-American prospects. Giannis Antetokounmpo finally took that giant stride everybody was waiting for, winning his first MVP award, averaging 26, 10, and 4, and being a finalist for the DPOY at the same time. Nikola Jokic helped his Nuggets team make the second seed in the West, competing with the Warriors team, averaging a near triple-double and making his first All-Star game. And Pascal Siakam in Toronto continued to get better, being the perfect second option to Kawhi Leonard, helping him make it to the second seed en route to win the Most Improved Player award. Outside of that, you still had Russell Westbrook averaging another triple-double and allowing Paul George becoming the primary option on his way to becoming a finalist in the MVP awards also, and LeBron James passing Michael Jordan in the all-time scoring list. But with that mid-tier regular season, it makes up for itself with an exciting playoffs, which for the first time in years does not include LeBron James. Out west, you still have the Warriors making easy work out of most teams they dealt with only a few red flags along the way, with included an injury to both DeMarcus Cousins and KD throughout the playoffs, and Damian Lillard making his first and only conference finals appearance to blow multiple leads to Golden State to ruin a chance to make it to the NBA Finals. Out east, we saw one of the best single-player performance in the playoffs in the modern age through Kawhi Leonard, who averaged over 30 points a game throughout his time against his Eastern Conference opponents, which included him making one of the most exciting and unbelievable game winners ever, beating the 76ers in 7, which capped off a 41-point game against one of the best defensive teams in the league. And then after being down 2-1 against the Bucks, decided to step up and primarily guard Giannis Antetokounmpo, who in those 2 games where they lost averaged nearly 30 points a game and made him drop down to scoring barely over 20 and dropping his efficiency down to a major deficit. Then into the finals, you had the matchup of the Raptors and the Warriors. Now this series made Kawhi Leonard known as the Dynasty Slayer, taking down the Heat in his earlier years and now doing the same with the Raptors against another 3-peat contender in the Warriors. But of course, to this day, people demean this championship run by the Raptors due to key injuries to Kevin Durant throughout the finals, for him to come back and then be out for the whole season next year, and of course the unfortunate injury to Klay Thompson in Game 6 and him also missing Game 3 due to hamstring issues where they also lost. Again, it puts a sour taste in some people's mouths, especially Warriors fans. But in the sports world, injuries are a part of the game and there's nothing you can do about it. We're just going to have to get used to it, obviously. With that and the huge team effort from the Raptors that whole series, with 6 players scoring over 11 points a game, and the huge Game 6 from the Raptors with 4 players scoring 20 points or more, solidified the Raptors as champions for the first time in NBA history. Now, for the whole season in general, you had the relatively average to above average regular season alongside an exciting playoffs, watching the fall of the Warriors and the rise of the Raptors, and of course, the heroics of Kawhi Leonard. Not super historic, but it had a lot of things within the season that made it very memorable. With that, I'll give it a B for definitely being above average in quality. Of course, if the Warriors were healthy and still lost, this would be an all-time great season. But of course, we're just gonna have to take what we can get. And now we're back into good times, at least kinda, but we'll get into that later. But by good times, I mean parity returns to the NBA in the 2019-20 NBA season as Kevin Durant decides to leave the Warriors via sign trade, and he goes to Brooklyn while D'Angelo Russell gets traded to Golden State after his fun tenure with the Nets. But not even that. There are definitely even bigger news in the offseason as the GM strikes again, getting another superstar in Anthony Davis, who has had an interesting end to his time in his New Orleans career, for a plethora of young players and picks. And once again, you have even bigger news. Kawhi Leonard leaves Toronto despite the advantages he was going to be given if he would have stayed. The whole country was literally backing him to stay there for the bright lights of Los Angeles to side with the Clippers. However, with the stipulation that they get Paul George, which Jerry West, the GM, agreed to by trading away a stack of first-round picks for Paul George alongside of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Danilo Gallinari. And this star-studded summer still doesn't end because you have Kyrie Irving joining KD in Brooklyn and Jimmy Butler being traded to Miami, and the cherry on top, the legendary time for Russell Westbrook in OKC comes to an end with him being traded for CP3 to end the duo of himself and James Harden. The summer of 2019 had to be one of the best off seasons to date, especially in this video, and it caused a lot of talks within the league. Will the Lakers be able to win a ring with AD and LeBron? Will the Clippers follow through with the possibility of having one of their best teams in franchise history? Will this Russ and James Harden duo be able to coexist with each other? The talks hyped up what people would expect to be one of the best seasons in NBA history, contending with the 2015 season. But we kinda got it while not getting it at all. And you know exactly what I'm about to talk about, because as the coronavirus became more widespread and a certain Frenchman decided to make a joke, the NBA season got closed down for the foreseeable future, as most major sports leagues did. However, after a long time and an interesting time away from basketball that included the NBA trying to impress the masses with a damn game of horse, basketball came back, however through the lens of the NBA Walt Disney World bubble, where a select group of teams would stay to finish off the season with no crowd, no access to the outside world physically, and weeks of basketball. The regular season, though, ended on a weird note that everyone can agree on, especially when the top 2 teams in the Western Western Conference in the Clippers and Lakers, requested for the season not to even go on. But when the money is being lost and the demand is being made since everyone was locked at home, the NBA delivered, giving us seeding games for the bubble, then the playoffs. But before that, that same time in the bubble created a lot of interesting dialogue, mainly from the standpoint of how effective it was compared to an actual NBA atmosphere, and did people actually even care? There are logs of players referring to mental health issues and reluctance to play due to hard times, even players who chose not even play in the bubble itself. Due to that, we saw the weirdest of players pop off, the collapse of a lifetime from the Clippers, and the finals that no one cared about. Overall, the playoffs without the bubble talk was pretty decent with the comeback boys in Denver. Houston almost losing to OKC, who was being led by Chris Paul, so he had his revenge, and the Luka Doncic playoff debut. But once again, talks all over the league showed how no one really cared for it in the first place. Even with everyone trapped at home, the ratings for that year's playoffs damn near plummeted. Even while you had LeBron James winning his 4th ring against the Heat in 6, the ratings for it was as lowest it has ever been. And you know it's especially bad when people all over will continue to demean that trophy and not even talk about it in general like it's a blight of the past and should never be discussed. Due to that, it's only right that I give this entire season a D ranking. It had one of the makings of the best seasons ever, especially in our modern time, but with everything leading up to it, we had to unfortunately go through a whole pandemic, leading basketball fans to not even care for the season, and you can even say the same for a lot of its players. So after that shit show finally being done, we are now in the 2020-21 season with new hopes and a hopefully clean slate, or at the bare minimum, something better than last year, which again, make your own opinion on it, but we still have some growing pains to deal with when it came to dealing with the pandemic. With 30 games being postponed due to COVID-19 related issues and injuries being thrown left and right because of poor management of the scheduling, you had a pretty rough regular season. But before that, we had more moves that would be made to change the potential of the league. For one, Chris Paul, the point guard that ages like fine wine, finally being traded from OKC to Phoenix, who wanted to take a step forward towards contention when it comes to being in the finals, matching him up with Devin Booker. Drew Holiday being traded to the Bucks to strengthen the Bucks point guard position after another Eric Bledsoe meltdown in the playoffs, and after one season of an experiment, James Harden gets bored with another toy by trading away Russell Westbrook for John Wall, and due to that, James Harden basically forced his way out of Houston, where only a month after the J. Wall Russell Westbrook trade was traded to the Brooklyn Nets to be alongside Kevin Durant and Kyrie, that had everyone losing their minds about the potential they can create as a trio, having 3 top 15 players in the NBA. And for good reason, because that season they had one of the best offenses in all of NBA history, but at the same time one of the worst in all of NBA history, so it kind of levels itself out some way. Anyways, with all that out of the way, this regular season was a mess from all over. Like I said earlier, this year alone, you had major injuries to LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Jamal Murray, Klay Thompson, Kawhi Leonard, Kevin Durant, and many other ones. Just look them up. It was pretty bad. Now, due to that, it created some interesting changes in the standings that can only be described in one way. The healthier your team was, the better opportunity you had to win games, as the healthiest team succeeded in the regular season. The Jazz and Suns, who rarely missed out on their stars, dominated the West, and with the Jazz having the league's best record in the NBA with a record of 52-20 for the first time in years. While out in the East, the 76ers had Embiid and Ben Simmons, who were thought to be heavy favorites, with Joel Embiid averaging a career market points, and Ben Simmons, well, he regressed, honestly, but no one will care about that until a certain event happens. Outside of that, the Nets were able to maintain the 2nd seed, and the Bucks had Giannis to keep them over the water. Then, of course, the main come-up story this year in the East was the resurgence of the Knicks and Most Improved Player Award winner, Julius Randle, leveling up into the realm of all-star status, averaging career marks in points, rebounds, and assists, leading them to the 4th seed. Outside of that, Nikola Jokic was his first ever MVP award, averaging a near triple-double, being the first center since Shaq to get the award, and Stephen Curry passed Reggie Miller in all-time threes ranking and became the all-time leading scorer in Warriors history. Now, coming into the playoffs with a now fully integrated play-in system, it was fully expected to have a lot of entertaining moments and dialogue throughout the entire span of it, and it did not disappoint. Out East, you saw the finals representatives of last year, the Miami Heat, getting swept by the Bucks due to their lack of shooting, and Trae Young becoming the absolute villain of New York. Then in the second round, you had some of the best playoff basketball being played between KD leading the Nets and Giannis leading the Bucks throughout the whole entire series, where the whole series came down to a literal foot ending the season for the Nets. And then in the other series, you had Doc Rivers once again blowing a lead, which came down to a 2-1 series lead that went down to an entire meltdown, including Ben Simmons showing why he is truly not made for greatness at the NBA level. Then out west, you had Luka versus the Clippers Part 2, where the Clippers played from behind to win in epic fashion, and then a beautiful Game 6 win against the Jazz from the heroics of Terrence Mann and the coaching of Tyronn Lue to make their first ever conference finals in franchise history, though at the cost of Kawhi Leonard. You had Damian Lillard being sold by his teammates and breaking the threes record in a playoff game, and also becoming the 7th all-time for a single game performance in the playoffs, while putting the fear of God into Austin Rivers the whole entire series. And of course, the Valley-oop happening in Game 3 of the conference finals between the Clippers and Suns, that I predicted, by the way. But with that, we are given an unexpected but welcome finals matchup between the Suns and the Bucks, and for many reasons. Two small market teams who haven't seen any substantial success in decades, Chris Paul's and Giannis's first ever playoff finals appearance, and most importantly, the return of the crowd during the finals. And this finals did not disappoint in the slightest. With the Bucks down 2-0, the Bucks went ahead and did a reverse sweep to the Suns in epic fashion, which included clutch blocks from Giannis in multiple games, Chris Paul choking in key moments, and the Game 6 masterclass from Giannis Antetokounmpo, scoring 50 of his team's 105 points to get his first ever championship and the Bucks' second ever championship in franchise history. Something not done since the 70s. And then of course, he blessed us with this clip that only Giannis can give us days after winning the championship.
Can I have, please, a 50-piece Mac Minis? 50 exactly. Okay. Not 51.
But overall, like I said, this season had mid written all over it due to the trash heap the regular season was, but the playoffs absolutely made up for it. But in a vacuum, we have to compare it to other seasons when it came down to the same mixes of dialogue, regular season, playoffs, etc., etc. With that, I think it's only fair that we sit this in the B tier. If it had a good regular season going for it with all the injuries and gobbledygook, I have no problem putting this in the A tier. But that regular season sure does drag it all down. And now for the final season of this video, the 2021-22 season. Leading into the season, there wasn't a lot of news, and it was believed that most teams relatively stay the same and run it all back. But that notion for the 75th NBA season was ruined when LeGN came in again to make another superstar move, trading for Russell Westbrook from the Washington Wizards to help towards his effort of getting a 5th ring. And to say this move caused some controversy would be an understatement, as everyone was questioning this move from all angles. Some hailing it as a great move for LeBron, some saying it was a horrible one due to the fit, and some saying this is even the best team ever made in NBA history. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Oprah. Anyways, outside from that, you had other little moves making some noise, like DeMar DeRozan going to the Bulls, finally released from his purgatory in San Antonio, and Kyle Lowry going to Miami to try to go after another ring. Like I said, this offseason was rather quiet, but going into the season, the conversation stayed the same, except this time, most teams were healthy throughout the season unlike last year, and while this season was raging on with the Suns dominating the NBA with their team-oriented play, and Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic fighting for an MVP spot, the Brooklyn Nets and Philadelphia 76ers had their own issues brewing, with Ben Simmons creating issues within the organization, skipping practice, not going to team events, and even getting a lot of his contract voided due to his fines taking it all away. It created the perfect situation for James Harden and Ben Simmons to be traded for each other, with a couple of role players added to the side, to create a dynamic duo of James Harden and Joel Embiid, who was the leading scorer in the NBA that season. While the Nets, well, they got the human embodiment of a deadweight as he continues to not play for the whole season. Moving on in the season, you had the Lakers ended up being the 11th seed due to their failure that was the Russell Westbrook experiment. The Suns having their best record in franchise history. Brooklyn dropping off to the 7th seed due to injuries themselves and the Kyrie situation. Then of course you had Nikola Jokic winning his 2nd MVP in controversial fashion to some people, and Stephen Curry become the all-time leader in 3-pointers made in a career. But with the playoffs, it can be described in one word, and that word is blowout, because in 26 of the total playoff games in that postseason, you had games ending by win margins of 20 points. Over a fourth of the game in the playoffs ended with a blowout, which really got people bummed throughout the whole entire thing. You still had storylines like the Pelicans scaring the Suns in the first round, KD getting swept by the Celtics, the great 7-game series that happened between the Bucks and Celtics. And the same can be said about Luka Doncic taking down the Suns, and also the other series between the Heat and the Celtics in the conference finals. But in the finals, you had another unexpected but welcome series between the Celtics and the Warriors. On one side, you had the young Jason Tatum leading his team to the finals with his team full of defensive gods. And then on the other team, you had Golden State looking to continue their dynasty they had going on until the 2-year hiatus happened. But the true game here in the finals was a game of wits between Ime Udoka and Steve Kerr, which was easily won by Kerr as he had play sets to torch this top-ranked defense while making Jason Tatum average 21 points on terrible shooting inside the arc and caused him to turn over the ball almost 4 times a game. Unlike some of the finals we talked about today, this one was truly a battle of wits on the court, and when it comes to the Warriors, 10 times out of 10, you're not going to win that game without a little injury or two happening, which gave Stephen Curry his 4th ring and his first ever finals MVP trophy. Now, when it comes to the season overall, it was pretty okay. You had a decent regular season and a pretty mid playoffs at times, mainly because a fourth of the time you can start watching the game by halftime or the 3rd quarter. But for me though, I think it's safe to give this season a C. Nothing too spectacular to remember it by, unless you're Warriors fans really. Outside of that and the slander going on with certain players, it wasn't exactly too memorable. Now, once again, we've had a lot of interesting seasons over the years, from the rise and fall and rise again of the Warriors, from the culture shift of superstars moving teams every which way, and how LeBron gave us many great playoff moments. One thing I gotta say is that not all seasons are created equal, especially when you consider a pandemic being involved with a couple of them. Overall, I just wanted to do a deep dive on these seasons and see where y'all stand on my tier list and see what type of changes you would make on it. Of course, leave that in the comment section below. And remember, as always, this is just my opinion. We can all think differently and come to different conclusions. But as always, I hope you enjoyed today's video and learned something new, as my vision for this channel is to inform and entertain. Check out my social medias for the Inside Life Balvini and other channel news. Check out my Twitch and second channel where I post my stream highlights. And lastly, if you want to talk to your boy, there's always my Discord. But with all that out of the way, this is your boy, Alvini Linguini, saying peace.